Hello, I'm Ted Leverette, broadcasting from partneroncall.com. I'm the original business buyer advocate, and for more than 30 years, I've been helping people find and buy the right businesses the right way. Now, today, we're going to discuss what's happening and what might happen for the people wanting to buy and sell small and mid-sized businesses in the context of our global pandemic and the financial crises. We have people attending this Zoom conference from all over the world, and some of them are going to share their insights with us. I'm going to call you by name later, particularly if we've talked about it and you know that I'm going to call you. For everybody else, at the appropriate time, speak up. If anybody steps on one another, we'll just figure it out. We're in very uncertain territory, so what I'm going to say today may not be what I said yesterday. And guess what? It may not be what I'm going to say next week. So I think it's a good idea for all of us, even though we have people like me who I claim to be somewhat of an expert on searching and buying businesses. We just don't know what's going to happen. And so everything we know is getting tweaked by this sad reality. And that means every one of us, the advisors in this group, the searchers, the owners, the buyers, the lenders, particularly the lenders, you got to do your own research. So we'll do our best today. Here's a point I think I'd like to make right now. Searching can make sense, but only carefully. Don't waste time on undoable deals, or don't waste time on unreasonable or ill-prepared searchers, sellers, brokers, or anybody else. We don't have time for those people. Either they've done their homework and they know what they're doing, at least in the day that they're practicing, or we don't want to know them. And guess what? It's not all gloom and doom, particularly for people wanting to buy and sell small and mid-sized businesses. First, there's free or nearly free money out there, and it's available for people who are willing to reach out and get it. And I'm talking about the money, the cash or credit our governments worldwide, well, maybe not worldwide, but in a lot of countries are throwing at those of us in business, particularly small business. Free money or near free money, record low interest rates. Number two, there are lots of excellent opportunities right now, not next year, right now, to buy and sell businesses. But guess what? They're in the industries that the governments are classifying as essential. I'm not going to define it. We all know what it is. Wonderful opportunities right now. Third, for the people who can bring talent and cash to troubled business right now, there may not be a better time in our lifetimes going forward, our lifetimes, to get as good a deal as you can get right now. And I'm talking about for buyers and sellers. Now, that's going to happen in those so-called essential industries that are doing fine right now, but it's also going to happen in some of the troubled ones. You just got to be careful you pick what you shoot at and not go for a really dumb deal. And that's where your advisory team comes in. One of the things that I posted online and made available at my website is a booklet. It's about 60 pages. It's called 120 Financial Lifelines. My clients have been using this stuff for decades, and it is extremely rare for anyone who's used that booklet, particularly if I'm behind the scenes causing them to use it, not to increase their net profit 25% within the first 90 days. Think about that. You're getting almost free money or near free money. You got low interest rates. You buy or want to sell an essential business. You have the cash. And then if you're a seller, you deploy these tactics to make your business more marketable to buyers. And if your sellers, by the way, haven't done it, buyers, yippee, because as soon as you go in that first 90 days, you do these things. Go to my website, it's free, download it. 120 Financial Lifelines. Okay, so we know there's ample opportunity, but this is probably the riskiest times for most of us who want to buy, sell, or advise on businesses. And for you lenders out there, this is not a safe time. So let's talk about what works. A little while ago on LinkedIn, I posted a link to something that just blew me away. I saw it this morning at dawn, meaning before it gets light here in South Florida. A guy by the name of Tony Brown posted I guess you call it a podcast. It was almost like a webinar. It's about 10 minutes long, and in it he talks about how to normalize financial statements during this time. We're talking about the adjustments. Go to my LinkedIn profile. Go to Ted Leverette's LinkedIn profile. You'll see my activity. Find my comments to Tony Brown. The title is Selling a Business, How to Overcome a Crisis Event. You can also search Tony Brown on LinkedIn, but I don't know how many Tony Browns there are. Look for that title, Selling a Business, How to Overcome a Crisis Event. He puts up some spreadsheets that, man, shows you how to walk through all this stuff in today's environment. Now, as I say in my post, I'm not endorsing that. I'm not recommending that. I'm just telling you that if you're not doing that kind of thing, you can't have any sense of knowing what you're getting and what's coming. One of the things that's been bothering me, people, is what are the biggest or the most common legal risks? I'm talking right now during the coronavirus, during the financial crisis, from an attorney that affect searchers while we're evaluating. I mean, could we inadvertently create binding contracts that we didn't mean to do?
I'm Nancy Fallon-Hool from the owner of Velocity Law, a small boutique business law firm in the Chicago area. And Ted and I have talked about a few things that might be helpful. You asked me, Ted, whether buyers can accidentally become committed to something that they don't intend to. So this is the perfect time to understand that a term sheet and a letter of intent are not legally binding. Those are the ways, of course, you can express your interest without getting yourself tied up in something you don't want to be in. A non-disclosure or non-compete agreement, on the other hand, is legally binding, and it's legally binding even after the deal, or even if the deal doesn't become consummated. And then the asset purchase and the stock purchase agreements, those are both legally binding. Well, even if you've signed those and become bound, there are a couple of outs that you can still use as a buyer. One are just the standard exit clauses where you give either conditions under which you can exit, or you say you can cancel the deal for any reason whatsoever, which that's typically not done in good faith. You're going to have a seller who thinks you're not serious if you have these kick-out clauses that let you exit for any reason whatsoever. So be more specific about the kick-out clauses, the exit clauses, and what conditions you might want to exit under. Like the revenue goes below X, or the profit for 2 quarters in a row goes below X, or the number of employees are maintained at X, or the number of customers. Then there's also something called the MAC clause, the Material Adverse Change clause. It's it's a rep and warranty that the buyers and sellers give to each other. But in this case, the MAC clause is a seller's rep and warranty that there will not be any MAC, any material adverse change, between the date that the asset purchase or stock purchase is signed and the closing. And of course, things happen between signing and closing. But the MAC clause will give the buyer the opportunity to either make an adjustment to the purchase price if it's a material change. You don't want to mess around with minor things and tick people off trying to renegotiate on minor changes. It's just how the world works. And then you can even do post-closing changes in some cases if your agreement sets it up that way, that allows either working capital adjustments or post-closing changes. And then one other thought, a couple other current climate thoughts. One is, I just think it's important to let sellers know that you're a serious buyer, but don't give them the impression that the deal is firm when it might not be, because we all know you're going to have to up your due diligence to a higher level than previously. And then just be considerate of what the sellers are going through. You know, your inquiry itself, your due diligence, you're going to be taking away from them focusing on their business when they've already got more on their plate than they've had in the past, typically. And then one other current climate thing on due diligence, ask the seller if they applied for the SBA loans, the Paycheck Protection Loan and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and if they applied for it, and if it looks like it's coming, and if they did receive approval, what are they going to use it for? And then a key thing for you as a buyer is to confirm or find out that if the seller's lender will allow that loan proceeds and the application of it to be transferred to you, the buyer. Most SBA loans allow an acquisition for the transfer of the loan terms, but you want to make sure in this specific case that the buyer's application of those proceeds to your new company you've bought doesn't violate the terms of the forgiveness portion of the loan. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you. Look forward to hearing from the UK folks.
Okay, Martin, am I wrong?
You're right.
Okay, bring it on. Introduce yourself.
Yeah,
so
it's Martin Truman. I run a business called True Legal in the UK. It's a law firm, and we exclusively help business buyers and sellers. So probably up to £10 million value in terms of sale price, so the smaller end of the market. Yeah, just echo what Nancy said in terms of committing to a deal. In the UK, slightly different terminology used in terms of letters of intent, heads of terms, offer letter, used fairly interchangeably, but certainly not binding on either party, buyer or seller, save perhaps for a cost clause or a confidentiality clause, or maybe an exclusivity clause. Just tacking on to I think what we're seeing in the current market, certainly the last sort of 3 or 4 weeks with sort of pending deals, is that there's more of a reluctance on the part of a buyer perhaps to commit at the moment. So whereas there might have been a split exchange and completion, so a binding contract, but with a delay until completion, buyers generally, I think, are being a bit more cautious about actually committing to an exchange of contracts now, and sort of deferring it to maybe a simultaneous exchange of completion in 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks time, when things perhaps are a little more settled and more predictable. One of the other points that we're seeing is perhaps a rather than a deal being pulled, is for a renegotiation of the payment terms. So it might still be the same price, but part of that price is perhaps made more conditional, more contingent on certain things going forward that perhaps a buyer might have taken a view on historically, but with the uncertainty in terms of the economy or that particular sector, they're actually looking to make their further payments, their stage payments, more conditional on certain events. So that's coming very much to the fore. So we act for both sellers and buyers, obviously not in the same transaction, and we're trying to encourage, where we're acting for a seller, trying to encourage the buyer to stay engaged and make it clear that we're open to negotiating a different form of deal, but still trying to preserve the underlying value of the business that the buyer saw in the first place. And perhaps one last point was about in the UK we've got a similar batch of sort of loans and grants that the government are trying to throw at the small business. So there's open-ended discussions at the moment about how they should be treated between a buyer and a seller. If it's a share purchase, then that value stays with the business going forward, but is there an adjustment in the completion accounts? If it's an asset purchase, should part of the grant be apportioned between the buyer and the seller? And that's, I think, very much down to a negotiation rather than anything in black and white there. So those really are the UK angles, I think.
That it, Martin?
Yeah, for now.
Weston, can I count on you to bring us up to date? It's only been a week. What's happening out there in real time when somebody is contacting your firm and saying, I'm a buyer or a seller, how do we account for what's happening? Introduce yourself, your firm name, please.
Hey everyone, Weston Kirk with Willamette Management Associates. We've had a lot of calls in the last week, a lot of discussions on really family gift planning. I a couple on transactions. I think people are still just uncertain with their capital expenditures and with their transactions, but a good number are still moving forward. So it's just going to be a slower process than what everyone was anticipating, just because in-person due diligence and kind of the typical negotiation process that is in person can't occur. So we're seeing just a maybe a little bit slower process, maybe an extension of 2 months or so, but things are still going along. We're hearing that there's capital calls from private equity funds to investors. And so the private equity funds are looking at making investments now. So I think that's reassuring, a reassuring trend. And so I think there's probably going to be more activity on the private equity side from funds in the near term.
Okay, Weston, next week, I hope you come back. What I want to hear is when somebody says, I want to value this business in April 2020, what is the appraiser going to say about those financial statements? If you don't want to take a stand now, come back next week. Or can you do it now?
Well, I mean, we're not supposed to make valuation calls without doing due diligence, but there's definitely some effect, right? I think everyone is recognizing that there's an effect to COVID-19, could be positive or could be negative. And I think those have to be weighed in terms of your cash flow that you're expecting to receive as an investor. 2020 is definitely a lot of more guessing than normal. And then the other areas are in your present value discount rate, what's your risk of that future cash flow, and lastly, liquidity factors, things that knowing that if you're making an investment in a private company, you know, things could change and you're going to be locked into an investment. So there's maybe a liquidity premium. And so those are the issues I think that whittle down to those three adjustments in valuation, and every company is unique.
Thank you, Weston. And liquidity is the name of the game. That's actually illiquidity. And speaking of that, exit planning, here's what I want to know. What are the exit planners out there telling owners who are saying, gee, is now a time to be thinking about getting out? Probably if they've never talked to you until today, it's a little late. But how about the companies that you're already working with who hired you a while back to help them think about exit? I mean, the whole world's changed. What is exit planners telling owners now?
It's interesting, Ted. I had an owner who I've been working with for about 2 years now, year and a half or so. And she reminded me that she had attended a Vistage conference that I was at in Boston. And by the way, my name is Jane Johnson. My company is Business Transition Academy. I'm located north of Boston. And this owner who is planning to do an internal transfer was thinking back to a Vistage summit we had here in Boston 3 years ago. And as she walked into the room late to the meeting, everyone in the room was saying, I promised to sell my business by 2019. I promised to sell my business by 2019. And she said, and here we are, you know, in 2020. So we've been saying for quite some time that we were on borrowed time with this market, and we didn't know quite what was going to take it down. But so what we're talking to owners about now, Ted, is rebuilding with the exit in mind. Rebuilding with the exit in mind. You know, as we educate owners on the exit, you know, one of our modules is talking about business, of course, and how businesses are valued and what drives the value in a business, how buyers look at the business, what types of buyers are out there, what's the selling process like, what about taxes and fees. We're educating them on all of those things. And of course, now the big focus will be on rebuilding the business, but we want them to do it this time with the exit and just grow for growth's sake, but figure out how much you need to grow in order to exit and be okay financially. You know, figure out what you really want to have happen and what options are your most desirable options. and then really focus on rebuilding the business back so that you can be valuable again to the outside world. What's interesting, of course, is the statistics on selling the business. As we all know, it's about 15% of the companies actually sell to an outsider. So the vast majority of sell to insiders, but there are those brave parties who want to try the external exit. And for some of them, it makes total sense to sell externally. They don't have successors, or it's much more valuable play to sell externally. But anyway, so they're all focused now on rebuilding the business, but we're hoping that it doesn't take that long. But I think it will be probably, I don't know, 18 months before many of them are in shape to sell externally.
Okay, Jane, thank you.
I'm more on the investment banking side.
What's happening out there in financing, particularly the availability of SBA 7A loans? Are they pretty much not going to be available because the lenders are just too busy coping with the other government programs?
That's what I'm hearing. So much of the effort, so much of the resources of lenders today is dedicated toward these government-backed lending opportunities for business owners. We did see, I'm sure many of us saw JP Morgan Chase no longer taking applications for non-government backed small business loans. I think that's very telling. It's probably just a matter of time before the other large banks follow suit.
What are you doing out in the marketplace now? How are you approaching it?
A lot of conversations, planting a lot of seeds. I had 2 deals just vaporize 4 weeks ago. One may come back, but the other one is it's gone. It's that owner makes his money off of large gatherings of people. The one that may come back is in the construction industry, but he's having some challenge with getting draws. So it really is, I think someone mentioned it earlier, it really is industry specific. If a business is an essential business, the tale of woe is not as great, but the further it gets away from that essential nature, it's difficult to talk to owners now.
Thanks, Bob. I really appreciate the insight. Eric, can you unmute and talk to us? Eric's a management consultant. What's going on out there in your world with respect to this crisis?
Yeah, hi, I'm Eric Gilbert. We're finding that it's basically a pause of 3 deals in process, and everybody's just sitting back waiting to see what happens. And we've been, as others have, planting seeds, and I'm not getting a huge amount of calls from sellers, to be honest. I think they're busy worrying about tomorrow versus worrying about the future.
Actually, last week I was sent a list of questions. I posted them on my website. I'm going to bust through these. There are about 10 questions. You're going to get 15-second answers from me. Remember, I'm somewhat shooting from the hips because who knows what it'll be next week. And this is where I want to open it to discussion. Okay, here goes. The first one. So how should a searcher modify their initial approach and potentially develop a relationship for a future transaction with a seller? Well, here's how I think you need to do it. I think you need to start with, we're in a mess. And let's talk about what it's doing for you, what it's doing for us. Is there any reason why now is a good time to begin talking about the transfer of your company? Maybe I could come in as an investor working partner and buy you out later, and we carry it together. You stay, I stay. Or in other words, it needs to be a fact-finding, relationship-building communication, not an outright, I'm a buyer, I want to do a deal. Anybody want to talk about that?
Yeah, my comment is that the first words out of my mouth are going to be, it's a long-term, consideration here. There's no rush. Nobody really knows exactly what's going to happen. So it's more of shoulder to shoulder and zero pressure. And it's going to take time for things to work themselves out.
Anybody else? Here's another question. It's kind of similar. It's when to make the approach, particularly when the owners are so scared. I think now is when we approach. searchers. I think now is when we approach the troubled businesses, the industries that are in horrible trauma, as well as the essential industries. This is the time to let owners know you're out there. And maybe now is not the time for them to accept a marriage proposal, but it could be a time to talk about setting a date for dating. What do you think? I got a thumbs up. All right, how about this one? Oh, this is a good one. How should a searcher think about financials and cash flow? Well, that's why I recommended the information posted on LinkedIn from Tony Brown. By the way, he's down in Australia. How's that, Matthew? Okay, good. He's down in Australia, and I'm doing a lot of talking to people in Australia. So see what Tony Brown has to say in the template he created about how to handle the adjustments. Anybody want to talk about financial cash flows, adjustments? Okay. How to value a business? Well, I think the appraiser tipped it off for us. Who in the heck knows? So if you don't have to do it, my opinion is don't. But if you do have to do it, well, then you better get a talented appraiser who's able to cope with all the uncertainty. Anybody want to talk about that?
Ted, back on the question about the adjustments, there've always been post-closing adjustments available if the parties agreed to them. It's just that they're, I don't know, I guess they're probably more important than ever. And you really need a good accountant, by the way, on the team, because accountants are the ones who can look at the financial records and properly and fairly suggest the post-closing financial adjustments. And post-closing adjustments, in case people are not familiar, are basically an adjustment to either the purchase price or the payment terms. Usually on the earn-out is where it gets adjusted for things not presenting in reality as described. In this climate, it's maybe things going downhill further than maybe the seller didn't say anything inaccurate. In this case, it's just things could be getting worse and for them and not better. So good accountant is my recommendation.
Anybody else? Quality of earnings, write it down. If you don't know what it is, look it up. Quality of earnings, that's what we're talking about here. When you bring in accountants, one of their assignments needs to be, what are the quality of earnings? In other words, how are they going to be sustainable? Huge. I don't want to talk about it any more than that now because it's a topic that would take days and weeks to get out, but it's well worth you doing some research on. David, I see you unmuting. You have something to say?
Oh, hey, Ted. I just wanted to add that for businesses that have been affected, particularly those that have been mandated to close down by local governments, I really think when it comes to valuation, those 2018 and 19 financials won't really be useful until we put 2021 down to bed. Because if we can show a recovery in 2021 and show that 2020 was really an abnormal year, then the track record back into 19 starts to be something that is interesting. I don't know what the future holds, but really many businesses out there have changed in a material way. They're just not the same business they were a few months ago.
But David, I know you specialize like I do in advising buyers. This is not to say buyers need to sit on the sidelines to 2022, because
No.
there are the essential industries and there are wonderful companies. They can go for them right now, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And although there are problems, as was mentioned, about the lending and whatnot, what I've been hearing from people since last week is simply that bankers are busy with those government programs. They're not willing to look at acquisition. As you know, the highest point of risk in any business usually is the moment of acquisition when we have the maximum amount of leverage. And so to your point earlier about approaching someone looking at some sort of partnership or partial equity acquisition, I've got a couple of clients who have opened that door with sellers saying, how about if I buy 60 or 70% of your business, you stay on board? Two of the big reasons why that is so attractive right now is you get to keep the experienced person involved in the business. And number two, you're not applying as much leverage, which makes the company stronger to get through this next turbulent period.
Excellent. Thanks, David. Pipe back in later. Okay. Here's another question. How will searchers evaluate the way that an owner responds to the crisis? And I'm adding something else. How do we evaluate the way that brokers are responding to the crisis? And here's my quick answer. If there's a BS factor, write it down and avoid them. This is a time for transparency, authenticity, a time for you not getting a bum rush. Anybody want to talk about how we want to consider the way these brokers and sellers are responding to us searchers? Okay, how about this one? Where are the sellers getting their best information? This is a good one. Well, if it's like usual, they're just making it up because they've got lousy records and lousy advice. Anybody want to talk about that? I guess I hit the point. Yeah, they're delving into the kinds of books and records we buyers and searchers see, and we're not impressed. How about COVID-19, the seller's timeline? Well, I think we've talked about that. It's deferred, and it may be never, because by the time buyers have enough courage in some segments or sectors to look at companies, they'll be out of business. They'll be out of business, just like it was in the Great Recession. Of course, the really good news is when the weaklings go out of business, the businesses that survive get free the employees and the customers. And the suppliers, of course, are more motivated because they just lost the customers. So there's some really wonderful opportunities as these unhealthy businesses or lousy managed businesses go out of business. Yeah, I'm looking. Somebody said, what about looking to pricing multiples, looking back to the third and fourth quarter of last year? Hey, we can look at them all we want. They're just not going to make any difference now. It's going to come down to liquidity, risk, etc. Right? Am I wrong on this? I'm looking for good news out here. Okay. Oh, this is a good one. Is now a good time for trading consulting for equity? I say yes. If you have nothing better to do with your time and you're at home on Zoom because you can't go anywhere and a company is willing to bring you in to consult with them but can't pay you, trade it out. There are lawyers and accountants out there doing that right now. And I know of a couple in the UK who are doing that right now. They're trading their talent for equity. Anybody want to talk about that? One of the other questions was, are you seeing a difference between the USA and the UK? I'm talking to people mostly in Canada, USA, United Kingdom, and Australia, and it seems to be the same everywhere. Matthew, down in Australia, while we still have you up, what we're talking about, is this what you're seeing in Australia?
It's very familiar, Ted. What I've noticed is people that were doing transactions that I've spoken to in the last week will see them through, but there's really nervousness about putting money out. I was just listening to what David was saying before about taking partners on and using that as a way to leverage into a business. I think I've had that conversation twice in the last probably 6 months, and I think it's a great idea. I think it de-risks it, but it really seems to be a trust issue as much as anything. The people, we don't really know you. There's only so many guarantees we can get that you won't do the wrong thing here somehow. So I wonder if that's just not indicative of general nervousness, because I thought that was a really smart way for everybody to find a way to get a sensible deal done. So yeah, perhaps it's the confidence in the market would be my observation, Ted.
Thanks, Matthew. Here's another question. The question relates to, are we seeing any difference, and this is related to the United States, but I think we just got tipped off to it anywhere, between in the southern states and the northern states, and particularly the Northeast. My opinion is not so much. If it's an essential kind of business, they're delivering services that are strongly needed everywhere in America and probably everywhere in the world. So if you're focusing on them, I'm not sure north, south, east, west, Australia, UK, Canada makes a difference. Anybody want to comment?
Yeah, I'd like to comment, Ted. The rules about which businesses can be open are different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So here where I live, if you're a non-essential business, you can still function as long as you're not admitting the public into your business. And so businesses that are non-essential are functioning with delivery and curbside pickup and things like this. My concern is that when you put a fifth to a quarter of the workforce out of work suddenly, what'll happen is the economic recession will start to cascade through the different industrial sectors. So right now, construction workers where I live are still working. As long as the foreman can keep the individuals 6 feet away from each other, they can still be on a job site. They're finishing up contracts that were signed months ago. Nobody's signing a new contract today to build a new house. So while those people are still working and spending money, in July, they're going to be done working. And I don't know if they're going to have another contract to go to. So my concern is that what we're seeing right now, as far as who's winning and who's losing, that picture of who the winning businesses are could be changing over the course of the spring and summer.
Wow, that is huge. Wow. One of the other questions is, what kind of language should searchers use when they're approaching owners, particularly if we're fishing for owners who might be willing to sell? Well, I think what you're hearing throughout this whole program today is we have to reach out and start with, we're all in this together. I want to own a business someday. Your business or your kind of business really interests me. Can we at least start talking to one another about it? I'm not asking for you, owner, to say you're for sale. I'm not asking for you to say you're going to sell it. But if you're interested in talking to a buyer about what I'm going to want to know, this is a good time for us with no pressure to begin to build a relationship. And by the way, for you searchers out there, that's exactly how I counsel my clients all the time. Is let's just get a conversation going, no commitments. And what we find is owners, if they trust us, if they think we're being authentic, they will let the cat out of the bag. They will say, I could be tempted to sell. And that leads to, I will sell. And that leads to a done deal. It's all about that nice, cushy relationship up front. Here's this is sort of like the final question. What's your prognosis for recovery? Don't ask me. If our governments don't know, if our financial wizards don't know, who knows? Anybody know? Speak up. If you're searching, you got time right now. Read my book, How to Prepare Yourself and Find the Right Business to Buy. I absolutely promise you it will change what you are doing. There are people on this call who are my clients. I'm not going to identify them right now. It changed what they were doing and what we'll do. You're going to save time. You will save money. You will achieve better deals. And you're going to be doing what the savviest buyer do. You can get these books only at my website. Right now, only my website, partneroncall.com. I'm Ted Leverette, the business buyer advocate, Partner on Call Network. Thanks, folks. Hope you'll tune in next Wednesday. Tell your friends and neighbors, particularly the searchers. Those are the ones we need to reach because they're the ones most at risk to stumbling into the market. I hope to see you next Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern USA time. We're done for the day. I appreciate those thumbs up.